Between January and March 2022, worldwide domestic passenger numbers fell from 8.1 million to 5.2 million, a drop of around 36%. This can be largely attributed to the conflict in Ukraine and the result of the sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation by nations that oppose the war. These sanctions range from international flight bans to the availability of spare parts and airworthy aircraft as a whole. It would be questionable to suggest that the state of Russian commercial aviation is in any way similar to what it was before the beginning of the armed conflict. The fall of the Soviet Union at the end of 1991 saw the beginning of post-Soviet commercial aviation away from the centralized government-run industry of the time, consisting of Aeroflot, Soviet Union flag carrier and chosen instrument, and the national carriers of the Warsaw Pact countries, such as Interflug of East Germany, Malev of Hungary, LOT Polish Airlines, Taram of Romania, and CSA Czech Airlines, to name a few. The changes in air travel went through an opening of new markets to Western and Eastern airlines alike, as well as giving citizens more travel choices. Notably, with the former Soviet airspace now open to Western airlines, these no longer needed to route Europe-Asia over or via Alaska to avoid the airspace. Arguably, the most seismic shift was a steady boom in domestic air travel in Russia, with 108 million passengers flown in 2019 across various different carriers, such as Aeroflot, S7, Ural Airlines, Pobeda, UT Air, and the now-defunct Transaero and Russia. This has largely been off the backs of Western-built aircraft that replaced the Tupolovs, Ilyushins, Yaks, and Antonovs that once dominated the Soviet skies. The former Soviet Union once had a sound commercial aircraft manufacturing industry, which collapsed after 1991. Since then, few new Russian designs have seen the light of day since 1991, and the older designs from the Soviet era have been largely relegated to either military or governmental services. Many of these older aircraft, devised for domestic routes, had the reputation of being inferior and inefficient in their class in terms of modernity, range, and passenger comfort when compared to their Western stablemates. Just as an example, the Tupolev Tu-204 is noteworthy for still needing a flight crew of 3, as opposed to its Western competitors, which only need 2. Theoretically, the Tu-204 is still in production, but the last one built to date rolled off the production line in 2018. The Sukhoi Superjet 100, a small regional jet comparable to the Embraer E-Jet family or the Airbus A220-100, pretended to change the fortunes of the industry. Unlike previous Russian designs, the SSJ program relied on foreign suppliers to source its components. Notably, Sukhoi partnered with the French engine manufacturer Safran to produce the Powerjet SAM-146, a derivative of the popular CFM-56 commonly used on the Airbus A320s and Boeing 737s. The Superjet didn't sell in high quantities for many reasons, ranging from a high-profile accident in Indonesia in 2012 during a demonstration flight, which tarnished the prestige of the aircraft at the time. After its entry into service in 2011, the type was plagued with reliability and logistical issues ranging from metal fatigue in the plane's skin to the reliability of the engines and spares. Irish airline CityJet withdrew their fleet of 7 Superjets due to reliability issues before their full order of 15 examples was even fulfilled. So what else does Russia have to offer? As of 2023, Russia has one major project in the works, the Irkut MC-21. This is to be a clean-sheet design, mid-range, single-aisle airline with a crew of 2 pilots and efficient engines. The new aircraft is meant to be the Russian answer to the Airbus Neo Boeing 737 MAX and Comac C919, powered by either Pratt & Whitney PW1000G geared turbofans or domestically made equivalent Adviad Vigatel PD14. Both engines are high bypass light and efficient power plants that make the MC-21 attractive to the market. MC-21 also incorporates various safety systems that puts it leaps and bounds ahead of previous Russian designs, as well as placing it even ahead of Airbus in some categories. Notably, the cockpit side sticks, the apparatus used to control the aircraft's ailerons and elevators, are linked, meaning that if one pilot commands something of the aircraft, such as a left turn, the side stick of the pilot not flying will mimic this action, and thereby preventing any form of control input asymmetry. The MC-21 also comes in two projected variants, the MC-21-300, the first variant currently undergoing flight testing and due to enter service in the near future, and the MC-21-200. The 200 is due to be shorter, with a capacity of just 165, compared to the 300's 211 passengers in a single-class configuration. The two variants are due to have a range of 6,000 to 6,400 kilometers, or 3,200 to 3,500 miles, somewhat comparable to the A320 or 737 family of aircraft. Naturally, the MC-21 attracted orders from major Russian airlines such as Aeroflot, UT Air, Red Wings, and Nordwind Airlines, among others, as well as one firm international order for 10 examples from Azerbaijan Airlines. Currently, the firm orders and options for the type stand at 175. In addition to the MC-21 and SSJ-100, Russia and China are jointly developing a wide-body aircraft called the CR-929 as a joint venture between Russia's United Aircraft Corporation and China's COMAC, with a new projected entry into service date of 2028 to 2029, moved up from its original projections of 2024 to 2025. It has been said that the prototype is in production as of late 2021. However, any photos or data of the type have yet to be seen at the time of the production of this video. We have been largely looking at what flying experience in Russia has to offer under ideal circumstances. However, we have somewhat avoided the elephant in the room and the effect that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had on aviation in the country since the invasion's launch in February of 2022. Almost immediately after the invasion began, much of the Western world barred Russian aircraft from entering their airspace, and Russia mirrored this action in an action reminiscent of the status quo of the Cold War. Western airlines wishing to fly to Asia, which would usually have to overfly Russia to get to Asia, now have to take longer routes further south or up over the Arctic via Alaska in order to avoid Russia. This naturally has an economic impact from an operational point of view, but with the range of aircraft available today, this is not nearly as big of an inconvenience as it was in years gone by. The situation in Russia, however, is very different. In Soviet times, established and approved air corridors allowed Russian flights to operate to Western nations, with Aeroflot and other Eastern Bloc countries being commonplace at airports like London Heathrow. Now, though, Russia is suffering a near blanket ban from operating in any European country west of Belarus. Russians now have a very limited international network, with destinations to countries who are either aligned with Russia, such as Belarus, Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, and China, as well as countries who are either neutral to the war or have been lenient in terms of sanctions, such as India, the UAE, Turkey, the Maldives, Thailand, and Serbia. The new route network is a shadow of its former self. The cost of travel for the average Russian citizen has also risen exponentially due to the sudden influx of people fleeing the country for political reasons or to avoid being mobilized into the military. Airfares out of the country reportedly rose by nearly 800% immediately after last year's mobilization order in September, from an average of $350 pre-mobilization to roughly $2,715 per person on the few airlines still operating services to Russia. Then the question is raised of whether the commercial aviation sector can even survive in the long term. In the short term, it has been. Very soon after the invasion, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed into law a bill allowing Russian airlines to re-register their aircraft that were owned by and leased from non-Russian leasing companies. Hundreds of aircraft registered with leasing companies based in Ireland, Bermuda, and the Cayman Islands are now trapped in legal limbo as lessors have lost faith that Russian carriers would pay their leases. Facing the prospect of losing upwards of 50% of the Russian commercial fleet, this law was signed into effect on the understanding that if the aircraft didn't leave Russia, they couldn't be repossessed by the leasing companies that own them. And they already couldn't leave Russia because of the West closure of its airspace to the Russian aircraft. Now, as a result, Russia currently has a surplus of aircraft that will be used as sources for spares to keep other aircraft airworthy. But this can't last forever. Cracks have already begun to be seen in certain corners of the industry. In March 2023, it was noted that the troubled Sukhoi Superjet is near a complete grounding due to the unavailability of internationally sourced spare parts. While not an international success, the Russian short-medium-haul market is heavily dependent on the type. With 12 of the 15 global superjet operators based in Russia, operating a total of 146 examples between them, the loss of this workforce will be a severe erosion of operational capabilities in the coming years. A similar situation is happening with the MC-21 program, which before the invasion was a concerted international effort, with the project teaming up with various European, American, and other Western companies. Pre-invasion, the component makeup was a reported 38% Russian, 62% internationally produced. Post-invasion, however, the project has needed to undergo a vast Russification to get as many components as possible domestically sourced, with the makeup set to be targeted at 98% Russian, 2% internationally produced. But questions have to be raised as to whether this is fully achievable, and if so, how. Immediately after the invasion, and again after September's mobilization, the country saw a mass exodus of people fleeing the country, many of whom were Russia's best and brightest in a process known as brain drain, thereby leaving Russia with a shortage of highly trained personnel to supply these complex projects with the parts necessary to complete effectively. Furthermore, all international certification works on the MC-21 were halted, meaning there are only limited places it can be flown once Russia does certify it. Russia is now barred from buying any Western-made airliners. However, eventually, the Airbuses and Boeings that fly the Russian skies today will need replacing, and with limited other options to choose from, the MC-21 is now potentially the only practical solution to plug the gap in the very long term, and is not exempt of challenges. The war in Ukraine has arguably been the biggest upset to ever hit the Russian commercial aviation industry. Since the invasion, the industry, and potentially the country, has regressed more than 30 years to the times of the former Soviet Union. A once open and robust aviation market has all been cut off from much of the rest of the world practically overnight. With Russia choosing to go on its own, domestic aircraft manufacturing will have the resources and the government support, but will it be enough to save Russian aviation as a whole? Only time will tell.